Before time was a concept, and distance had a name, something shifted quietly in the fabric beneath memory. Not a rupture, not a tremor, but a slight dissonance, the kind that echoes not in the air, but in the bones of silence. You wouldn't notice it in a moment. But much later, when the nights stretch long and thoughts drift through the cracks of certainty, you might hear it again, faint, irregular, asking to be heard. This is not a history of what happened. It is a history of what was removed. This is historic sleep, and tonight we begin with what fell through time uninvited. A disk of bronze barely larger than the palm of a hand once lay buried in a sunken wreck off the coast of Antikythera, corroded, fragmented, mute. But within its wound gears and patient rust sat a symmetry that did not belong to the century it was found in. It did not belong, perhaps, to any known age at all. They called it a mechanism, a word that suggests simplicity. But no clock in the modern world could mirror its intricacy without asking how time itself had learned such mathematics so early, so silently. Was it Greek? That's what the inscriptions claimed, faint, almost scratched by wind. Names of planets, calendars, eclipses. It whispered predictions, not memories. A machine not to record, but to foresee. The sea kept it quiet for 2,000 years, and when it rose again, the silence remained in museums, in texts, in the unsettled hush between scholars' conclusions. You might say it was just an ancient analog computer, an anomaly, an isolated spark in a dark age. But anomalies, when gathered like grains of ash, form patterns, and patterns lead to fractures in what we think is whole. The device's design included knowledge of the metonic cycle. The Saros Eclipse series, the positioning of celestial bodies, with a precision that even now makes computers blink with reverence. How did they know? And why did they stop knowing? There is no lineage, no prototypes, no drawings in temples, no student notes in forgotten scrolls. The Antikythera mechanism appears in history like a word that was never taught, spoken fluently, once, then lost entirely. In a world where ideas crawl forward, this one leapt, then vanished. Some believe it was one of many, that it had siblings clocks for the sky calendars for the soul devices to speak with the eternal return of stars. But if they existed, they left no bones behind, only the ghost of their logic. The mechanism defies the timeline. It does not fit neatly into the drawers of ancient innovation. Instead, it perches uncomfortably between myth and proof, like an eye that opens without blinking. You can ignore it, of course. Many have. But ignoring does not unmake the question. Who made it truly? If it were a culmination, we would find echoes. But there are none. Just that one gear, that one ring of teeth aligned not by luck, but by understanding. Understanding of cycles of light, of cosmic rhythm. Knowledge not gathered revealed, or remembered. Perhaps it belonged to a legacy erased. Perhaps something once flourished where now there is only dust and echo. Or perhaps the device was not from a place, but from a mind, one that found through silence and solitude the pulse of the universe and tried to give it shape. The Greeks revered order. But this was not order. This was awareness. And then, nothing. No continuation, no school, no transmission of its secrets. The mind that built it or the culture that bred it sank beneath time, like the ship itself. A ship lost not just to sea, but to narrative. Some wonder if it was hidden on purpose, if its voyage was flight not trade, if its pieces were never meant to be found by eyes unready. The sea, in its cold patience, guarded it well until the 20th century cracked open the past like a tomb. And when it surfaced, what did we do? We catalogued, we photographed, we reconstructed digitally, mechanically. But none of this explained why it existed or how. We fed it into the machine of modern logic, and still it emerged as an oracle whose language we do not speak. You may hear the name and think it's solved. Antikythera, a label, a location. But names are not explanations. Names are often the last attempt to contain what resists comprehension. Some proposed it was Atlantean, not literally, but symbolically. A remnant of a forgotten surge of brilliance drowned in war or flood or forgetting. Others whispered of extraterrestrial contact, of ancient intervention. But truth rarely announces itself in thunder. It walks in dust, in ruin, in fragments so precise they feel accidental. There are those who say this is simply the brilliance of humans underestimated, that genius is not linear, that brilliance blooms in lonely places and dies without legacy. But that itself is the deeper question: why was there no legacy? Why did the mechanism not become a seed, but a fossil? If this was the apex of a science now buried what shattered the ascent, what hand erased the record? Perhaps there are no answers, or perhaps we've been told not to ask. The Antikythera mechanism remains in pieces, reassembled by thought but not by certainty. Each gear aligned, each dial spinning, but its origin still submerged. It sits like a clock that doesn't tell time, but waits for it. And we, in our confident timelines, pass by its glass case and pretend the past is settled. But every revolution of its brass wheels is a whisper that the past is not past, only misfiled. Not lost, misremembered. Not broken, buried. And beneath that burial, not silence, but the hum of a rhythm once known. Once? If truth had shape, it would not be solid. It would drift like smoke in a sealed room, shifting in form without ever leaving. What you see in one breath would dissolve in the next. That is the nature of knowledge, unanchored. And that is what stands at the center of the desert, taller than reason, heavier than history, sharper than silence. They call them pyramids, but a name is not a meaning. And for centuries we've been taught what to think of them: tombs, temples, triangles of ambition. Yet none of those words carry weight enough to explain the stillness they radiate. Stillness not of death, but of withheld explanation. The Great Pyramid of Giza stands without inscription. Not one wall within speaks the name of a king. Not one brick claims ownership. No cartouche, no narrative. Just structure, precise, immutable, patient. And so we filled in the silence. We said it must be Khufu's, because Herodotus heard a story, because later dynasties whispered backward, because archaeology wanted alignment. But there is no body, no sarcophagus that held a king, only an empty chamber, a perfect void in a heart of stone. The stones themselves do not speak, but their arrangement, the alignment, the measure, the impossible geometry tells of a language we have not translated. The base is almost a perfect square. The sides match the cardinal points with a precision GPS would admire. The proportions speak in P and F long before we gave them names. Coincidence, some say, a mathematical fluke born from architectural necessity. But how often does necessity hum with cosmic frequency? And then there's the mass. Millions of stones, some weighing as much as an elephant, placed so tight that a razor cannot pass between them. No mortar, no modern explanation. Theories abound, but none repeatable, none proven. Just diagrams and doubts. More curious still is the erosion. On the Sphinx nearby, water has carved memory into limestone. Vertical striations, patterns of rain, not sand. And rain in that quantity has not visited the plateau for over 9,000 years. That would place the monument long before dynastic Egypt, long before language as we know it, long before what we admit we remember. And yet no one claims this openly. Because to shift the timeline is to fracture the structure. If Egypt is older than we thought, what else is misplaced? What else rests on mistaken sequence? The absence of tools, of markings, of errors, all too perfect, as if the builders had no need for trial, no drafts, no apprentices, only the execution of a memory so old it arrived whole. Some whisper of an ancient, lost civilization. Not mythic Atlantis, but something quieter, a people who understood stone like we understand light, who measured time in shadow and geometry, who built not for the living, but for a silence deeper than death. Others suggest reverse engineering, that later Egyptians found something already ancient, already revered, and adopted it as their own. That dynasties grew like moss upon the roots of a tree whose seed they never planted. There is too the matter of alignment to Orion's belt, to Sirius to the solstices. Not decorative, but deliberate, as if the structure were built not on the earth, but within the sky's reflection. If it were just one pyramid, perhaps we could dismiss it. But Giza is a triad mirrored in the stars. And around the globe, echoes rise in Mexico, in Cambodia, in Bosnia, in China. Shapes that repeat, slopes that mirror. Not the same, but familiar like dialects of a shared origin. Could knowledge once have spanned oceans before the oceans became borders? Could memory have once spoken in stone and been buried not by time but by intent? Because somewhere along the way the knowledge ended. The knowers disappeared. The line of inheritance snapped. We do not build like this anymore. We cannot. Not because of resources, but because of reason. No blueprint today would survive a boardroom. No committee would approve such silence. We want function-form explanation. We cannot allow mystery to be the reason something stands. But the pyramids do not explain. They endure. Even the interiors resist understanding. Chambers misaligned with expectation. Shafts that lead not to air, but to stars. Passageways that seem symbolic, ritualistic, or perhaps something else. Measurements that echo frequencies. Rooms that resonate, like instruments tuned to planetary hums. What if the pyramids were not tombs, but keys? Not monuments, but machines. Not for death, but for transition. Not of soul, but of consciousness. We will never know, because we stopped asking. The narratives settled. The labels stuck. The textbooks printed. The questions dulled. And still they stand. Under sandstorms, under moonlight, under centuries of footsteps and excavation, they remain unchanged. And in their stillness, they do not declare they unsettle. Not because of what they are, but because of what they suggest. That something was known, and then forgotten, or worse, erased. By whom? And why? Perhaps it was not malice. Perhaps forgetting is the cost of survival. Perhaps history itself is a defense mechanism hiding from us what would unravel the frame. Or perhaps remembering would be too loud, and the pyramids in their mute majesty are the last whisper of what should never be shouted. Somewhere beneath the surface of what we call certainty, a sound lingers, not heard through ears, but felt like breath against skin, like vibration along the edges of forgetting. If silence had a shape, it would resemble a frequency no longer spoken, a tone, no longer sung. And somewhere in the deep that tone still resonates. Off the coast of Crete, beyond the reach of waves remembered in storybooks, lies the Aegean Sea, a basin of blue that has swallowed more than just time. Beneath its shimmering lid are ruins. Pillars, steps, doorways leading into nothing. Sunken paths where sand has smoothed the edges of memory. We call them remnants. We call them coincidence. But we do not call them questions. The sea covers more than stone. It muffles what once echoed. And in its depths, divers have reported something else, not structure, but sensation. A kind of pressure behind the eyes. A low, untraceable hum. Instruments flicker. Metal misbehaves. Time becomes uncertain. Some say it's magnetism, others acoustic anomalies. But the sea does not explain. It conceals. In 1968, near the island of Yonaguni, off Japan's coast, strange formations were found under the ocean right angles, terraces, sharp-edged columns, arranged with too much intention to dismiss as natural. Geologists argued. Archaeologists resisted. The patterns were too precise, but no one agreed on a name. Some whispered sunken city, others called it illusion. But the ocean, like history, doesn't need permission to hold what it holds. And then there was the Bimini Road, a line of stone blocks submerged in the Bahamas, almost perfectly straight, almost perfectly impossible. First seen from the air, then touched by divers. It stretches across the sea floor like a path waiting to be followed. Or forgotten. Its age is debated, its purpose unknown, but its presence unnerving. Because if these are ruins, they rewrite the story. They imply civilizations older than the oceans that now hide them. Cultures that mapped coastlines long before they were swallowed. People who built in places we've only just begun to look. But no one wants to redraw the map. No one wants to admit the borders of memory may be incorrect. And so we say natural formation, tectonic activity, coincidence of shape, but not creation, not intention, not history. Still, the sounds remain. In 1997, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration recorded a low-frequency sound in the South Pacific. Loud, powerful, unexplained. It lasted for over a minute, rising in pitch vast enough to be heard over 3,000 miles away. They named it the bloop. At first it resembled a biological signal, organic, like the vocalization of a creature. But nothing known, no whale or machine could account for its volume. Then came the theories deep-sea life larger than any previously discovered, or perhaps tectonic plates groaning, or perhaps something else entirely. The sound was never heard again. But the ocean is not silent. It stores frequencies like secrets. It speaks in patterns we cannot decode. And beneath its layers sounds move ancient, unclaimed, unresolved. Some of them follow no known path. They bounce and warp and vanish. And the ruins where they exist seem drawn to them, or perhaps the sounds are drawn to the ruins. What if they were connected? Not by accident, but by design. What if ancient structures once resonated with these frequencies to map the earth, to measure the sky, to commune with the unknown? The Temple of Hathor in Dendera bears images of what look like tuning forks of priests, holding staffs toward columns etched in harmonic geometry. Cymatics before the term existed. Resonance etched into ritual. In India, the iron pillar of Delhi resists corrosion, not just by metallurgy, but by something in its composition, its location. Some say it hums when struck. Some say the air around it is not like other air. Are these myths? Perhaps. But myths are often metaphors for memory too dangerous to remain literal. Across the globe, sacred sites share frequencies, not in hertz but in sensation. Stonehenge, Machu Picchu, Chavin de Huantar, temples designed not just to stand, but to sing. Infrasound, ultrasound, frequencies beyond our hearing but not beyond perception. What if ancient builders weren't worshipping gods but tuning to the earth? And what if they weren't alone? The Dropa stone's circular discs found in the Bayankara Ula Mountains, etched with spiraling lines, hollow at the center, are said to tell of visitors from the sky. The text, according to some, spoke of sound as communication, not language. Vibration as thought. Their authenticity is contested. The stones themselves have vanished from public record. But the idea remains. That sound is memory. And that memory was hidden beneath water, beneath time, beneath belief. Because sound carries through water faster than air. And what is water if not a conduit for what must not be burned? In ancient Greece, Delphi's oracle spoke from a chasm. Her voice distorted by gases, yes, but also by echo, by rhythm. Answers delivered not in words, but in tones that twisted logic. The deep has always been a mouth, and we, afraid of what it might speak, have learned to cover our ears. But perhaps the ruins beneath the Aegean are not ruins. Perhaps they are instruments, tuned not for melody, but for memory. Waiting to be played, waiting to be heard. Waiting for the frequency of the forgotten to be found again. A map is not a truth. It is a decision. A shape given to the shapeless, a line drawn not by nature, but by need. We follow them as if they reflect reality. But what if the earth once wore different names, different borders, different meanings, ones we have since erased? Some maps should not exist. And yet they do. In 1513, Piri Reis, an Ottoman admiral, a scholar of navigation, compiled a map. Inked on gazelle skin, it was delicate, intricate, beautiful. But more than beauty, it carried something inexplicable. The Piri Reis map showed the western coast of Africa. Reasonable. The eastern coast of South America. Still plausible. But then at the bottom edge, something else, an outline unmistakably resembling the Antarctic coast. Without ice. That ice has cloaked Antarctica for at least 6,000 years, some say longer. Modern radar couldn't penetrate it until the 20th century. And yet here it was rendered with eerie accuracy 5 centuries before satellite imaging. Piri Reis claimed he drew from older sources, charts from the Library of Alexandria maps, older than memory. But those sources are lost, burned, buried, forgotten, or perhaps hidden. Scientists reviewed the map. Some said coincidence, others misinterpretation. A few whispered anomalous knowledge, a cartographer's echo of a world we no longer admit existed. The Piri Reis map was not alone. In the Orontius Phineus map of 1531, Antarctica appears again, Ice-free, detailed, labeled with rivers, mountains, bays. Too precise to be myth. Too early to be explained. Then came the Boache map, the Zeno map, the Dulcert Portolan. Each one revealing parts of the world with knowledge too advanced, too informed, like fragments from an atlas belonging to a civilization before ours. These maps, layered in time and intention, defy the progression we assume is linear. They suggest a cartographic memory passed from hand to hand across collapse and conquest, never fully understood by those who preserved it. And always the question returns, how did they know? What eyes saw the land beneath Antarctic ice? What ship sailed waters that, according to our textbooks, should not have been known? There are stories, quiet ones of ancient mariners, not mythical, not divine, just forgotten. Cultures with seafaring knowledge far beyond their presumed era. Polynesian navigators who read stars like language. The Phoenicians whose ships reached shores now considered unreachable. The Doggerland fishermen sailing lands now drowned beneath the North Sea. Perhaps once oceans were not barriers but bridges. Perhaps once the continents spoke to each other. In Bolivia, the ruins of Tiahuanaco rest high in the Andes. Carvings suggest star charts. Alignments suggest astronomical precision. The Puerta del Sol. The Gate of the Sun stand silent, its glyphs unread, its orientation exact. And some speculate that it once sat at sea level, that it predates the mountains that now cradle it, that it belonged to an age when the Earth's skin had not yet shifted. We dismiss such claims. They do not fit the diagram. They do not align with the clockwork of accepted history. But the maps remain. There is, too, the matter of Mercator, celebrated for his projection, his globe-spanning accuracy. But in private letters he referenced maps he could not explain. Ones he borrowed from monastic archives drawn by hands, long vanished, showing islands now submerged and coastlines long reshaped. He spoke once of Hyperborea, a northern land encircling a polar sea split by rivers and crowned with a mountain. Not fantasy, he insisted, but memory. From charts older than Christianity, older than empire, perhaps older than writing itself. We've made those places into myth. Atlantis Mu Lemuria, names that now trigger dismissal, not curiosity. But what if myth is merely history obscured? What if the destruction was not fire and flood, but forgetting? There are no remains of these cartographers, no graves, no journals, no schools, only the works themselves impossibly precise, suspiciously early, drawn by minds that, if real, change everything. Could there have been an epoch before ours, a civilization global in scope, mathematical, in thought erased not by time, but by force? Some suggest a pole shift, not magnetic, but axial, a realignment of the planet's skin. Ice swallowed cities, mountains rose, oceans redefined land, and the survivors scattered past fragments to the next age. Not the knowledge itself, but the memory of it. Handed down, sketched, mistranslated, preserved by chance, misunderstood by design. A compass lost in a fire, a globe hidden beneath dust. A map inked on skin telling of a world we never knew we forgot. And still we resist. Because maps are authority. They define what is real. To admit an error in one is to question the rest. But the coastlines don't lie. They linger beneath ice, beneath salt, beneath denial, waiting for someone not to discover them, but to remember. Some doors do not open outward. They open inward, not into rooms, but into realms, not into structures, but into silence. And among the stones of this world, some were carved not to contain, but to conceal. In Baalbek, Lebanon, a terrace of stone stretches out beneath the ruins of Roman columns. But those columns, tall as they are, do not hold the secret. The secret lies in the stones beneath them, blocks so massive they defy the tools of history. 3 of them form what is called the trilithon, each over 800 tons. Cut, moved, and placed with a precision modern cranes would struggle to match. No inscription marks their origin. No culture claims the engineering. They were already there when the Romans arrived, already laid, already waiting. We call them megaliths, as if naming them explained them, as if weight and size were the mystery's not intent. Why build on such a scale? Why begin with the impossible? The stories say giants. The theories say advanced tools. But the stones themselves offer neither. They remain silent, immovable, not in defiance in purpose. And then there are the doorways. At Hayumarca, in the highlands of Peru, a flat rock wall bears what looks like a doorway, carved with such symmetry it seems not made, but revealed. It leads nowhere. A frame empty. Locals call it the Gate of the Gods. Some speak of priests who vanished through it, holding sacred discs of gold. Some speak of stars. There are no hinges, no steps, no thresholds, just the suggestion of transition, a portal without passage. Or perhaps a passage without movement. It is not the only one. Across the world, from Egypt to Easter Island, from India to Anatolia, there are structures that resemble entrances carved into cliff faces, temples, mountainsides, but led to nothing. They invite approach, but deny entry. They are not ruins. They were built to be precisely what they are, thresholds to nowhere visible. Why? If they were symbolic, why the engineering? If they were spiritual, why the math? Some say they were markers, others say machines. Not mechanical in the way we understand, but harmonic, energetic, designed to interact with forces no longer measurable. Perhaps with sound, perhaps with memory, perhaps with something from beyond. Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey predates writing, predates farming, predates cities. 12,000 years old, maybe more. Pillars arranged in circles carved with animals, symbols, alignments. Not shelters, not graves, something else. The site was buried intentionally, covered over as if hidden from the future. And within its concentric rings, some see stories of celestial gates, of cosmic cycles, of returns, not of seasons, but of something greater. Why would a pre-agricultural society build with such precision? Why would they bury what they had raised? What did they believe was coming? Perhaps those stone rings were calendars, or warnings, or locks. Some believe certain places are points of convergence, where ley lines meet, where the skin of the earth is thin, where the past and future brush close enough to be mistaken for now. And in those places the ancients built. Not for glory, not for worship, but to open. Not the stone, but perception. They built gates to what we do not know, or perhaps we once knew and now refuse to remember. In Japan, the Yonaguni monument stretches beneath the waves like a staircase to nowhere. Massive platforms, sharp angles, steps and corridors, if they are that at all. The sea has claimed it softened its lines, but divers speak of spaces that feel intentional, like halls, like stages. What was it meant to face? Not the sun, it sits too deep. Not the stars, it sees none now. Perhaps it was not built for eyes. Perhaps it was never meant to be looked at, only felt. Ancient texts across cultures speak of doors between worlds. The Sumerians called them gates of the gods. The Hindus spoke of locus plains stacked like reflections. The Egyptians believed in duat, the passage through which the soul traveled, guided by structures not of flesh, but of stone and spell. Were these metaphors or memories? If these gates once opened not to place, but to state what closed them, and if they were closed, by whom? Or why? There is a pattern in the silence. The further back we look, the less explanation we find. The older the structure, the fewer the words. The greater the stone, the deeper the omission. It is as if history reversed itself, as if what came first was the most refined, the most aligned, and then a forgetting. A wall, a gate, sealed, and yet the structures remain. Not ruins, not puzzles, not messages, just forms, waiting, unchanging. They do not demand understanding. They do not reveal their function. They only stand as if enduring was the purpose, or the price. And if one of them ever opened again, what might step through? Language is not invented. It is uncovered, dug out from the silence between heartbeats, lifted from the dust of understanding. And sometimes in that dust we find a tongue that refuses to speak, not because it cannot, but because we are not yet meant to hear. In the lowlands of Mesopotamia, long before empires drew swords across clay symbols were pressed into tablets, wedges of thought, cuneiform, the first writing, the first attempt to trap time in marks. And among these marks, the Sumerians left behind something more than trade records and prayers. They left puzzles. Thousands of tablets remain untranslated, not because the language is lost, but because something in it resists completion. The grammar shifts. The meanings bend. Even among the texts we claim to understand, there are gaps. Sentences that seem to refer to things outside of context, words that have no counterpart in any living tongue, concepts not of this world, or perhaps no longer of it. One recurring word me, not ego, not self, but something more. The me tablets describe powers, principles, cosmic blueprints. They are not instructions, they are presences. Bestowed by gods, guarded by priests, encoded in rituals. 63 me in total, each governing aspects of reality, truth, victory, fear, lust, weaving, music, kingship. Not human skills, elements of existence. But why would a civilization so early speak of abstract principles as if they were artifacts? Unless they were. Unless the me were not just ideas, but actual objects, or devices, or transmissions, holograms of a world made before memory. Enki, the god who carried them, was said to dwell in a watery abyss, the Abzu, not hell, not heaven, a deep source of knowledge guarded unseen. Some scholars believe this was metaphor. Others say it was literal, an archive hidden beneath stone, beneath consciousness. The city of Eridu, said to be the first city, was his, and Eridu's ruins suggest a sophistication unearned by time, perfect drainage, layered construction, symmetry that speaks not of survival but design. But the city fell silent long before others rose, as if it served its purpose and was then sealed. What was stored there? What was hidden behind language? There are tablets that speak of black-headed people taught by the gods, not created, taught. And the gods, in turn, speak not like omnipotent forces, but like custodians of something delicate, something dangerous. There's one fragment cracked and faint that speaks of a day when the me were scattered, taken, lost. Not to war, not to fire, but to forgetting. And still they surface. In the temple of Inanna, the high priestess was said to have held the me of battle, the me of sex, the me of justice. They were hers to invoke. Not metaphors, but technologies of spirit. Today we dismiss them as allegory, as the poetic attempts of a primitive culture to explain human experience. But perhaps it is we who are primitive, because there is a pattern here. In Sumer language arrives whole, not evolving but complete, as if downloaded. The earliest texts are the most complex. Over time they become simpler, narrower, more administrative, less cosmic. That is not growth, that is erosion. And it is not the only place where erosion wears the mask of progress. In the Indus Valley, another script remains undeciphered. In Linear A, the same. Even Rongorongo on Easter Island has not given up its code. What if some languages were not meant to be read, but activated? What if some writing was not ink, but key? The Dogon people of Mali speak of Nomo ancestral beings who came from the star Sirius. They speak of Sirius B, the invisible companion star unknown to Western science until the 20th century. They say it is the heaviest of stars. They say it spins. They say it sings. And the Dogon language, when mapped against waveforms, forms patterns, rhythms, sequences. Not writing, not myth. Message, or echo. The ancients may not have written to be understood by us. They may have written to communicate across time or dimension or state. And what we now try to translate was never meant for us. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, a journey unfolds not of conquest, but of knowledge. The hero seeks immortality, not to live forever, but to remember forever, to know what was before. He fails. But in his failure, we are told something else, that the price of knowing is forgetting. That to see the me, one must lose the self. And perhaps we did. Perhaps the very act of history was a forgetting a trade of memory for chronology, a door closed by language. And the wedge-shaped marks of Sumer still sit quiet, patient, not waiting to be read, but waiting to be remembered. Somewhere between shadow and shimmer, a footprint fades. Not because it was never there, but because the ground itself was rewritten. Some presences do not vanish. They erase their trail. Across the deserts of North Africa, stretching past the Nile and through the lands now empty of song, the sands whisper of architects without names. Not kings, not pharaohs, not builders recorded in scrolls or stone, just shapes too large, too precise, too distant from chronology. In the heart of Libya, in a region called the Fezzan, lie ruins almost no one speaks of. Traces of structures worn to bone buried beneath dunes that move like breath. Stone foundations without history, geometries without purpose, aligned to stars that no longer sit where they once did. The buildings face nothing. They echo no cities. No texts mention them. No empire claims them. It is as if they were placed by hands that did not need to explain themselves. Further east in the Nubian deserts, satellite imaging has revealed lines long straight parallel etched across barren land. Ancient roads, perhaps, or markers, but they lead to emptiness. No ruins, no wells, no tombs, just intersections of nothing. And yet someone carved them, or something. Modern archaeologists estimate thousands of such tracks, too consistent to be animal, too broad for carts, too ancient for the cultures nearby. Some even cross into regions considered uninhabitable during their theorized era, and yet the lines persist beneath layers of time. Some say these were trade routes, others suggest rituals, but no artifacts remain, no wear, no detritus of civilization. Only the lines. In South America, the Atacama Desert tells a similar tale. Their geoglyphs stretch for miles, not the famous Nazca lines, but older, less stylized. Human shapes without context, crosses that predate conquest, spirals etched into dry earth that never speaks. The people who live nearby do not claim them. They only point and say, "They were here before us." Who they are is never answered. And always the marks lead toward nothing. No cities, no altars, no reason. It is as though these designs were not left behind, but left in retreat, the footprints of something pulling back from visibility, not entering it. In Australia, the Wollemi pines were once thought extinct for 2 million years, until a small grove was found hidden in a canyon. A biological time capsule, living memory sealed by distance. And nearby cave paintings depict figures not human, not animal, but hybrid, long-limbed, radiant-headed, surrounding what looks like geometry. Not art, diagram, but we call it dream time. And we look away. In the Arabian Peninsula, beneath layers of modern city and sand, are megaliths that mirror none nearby. Some were found only by accident construction crews, unearthing circles of stone perfectly aligned, then burying them again in concrete. No excavation, no study. As if the past had no permission to speak. All across Earth in deserts where survival is impossible, we find the residue of presence, not civilization, not settlement, just knowing. Someone or something understood these places, marked them, used them, but left before we arrived. And what they left behind were not structures, they were signatures. But of what? There are theories, of course, there are always theories. Paleocontact, ancient astronauts, civilizations lost not to war or decay, but by design. A withdrawal from visibility, a pulling back into silence. But these are not answers, they are deflections. Because the real mystery is not who left. It's why the trail is so clean. No bones, no tools, no graves, no debris. Only arrangements. Geometry scale alignment. It is as if the builders removed themselves, not only from the land, but from time. And the silence that follows is not empty. It's curated, like a gallery that once held art too powerful to display. And in that silence we find an echo, because in every culture there are myths of beings who taught, then vanished. The Sumerian Apkallu, the Mayan Itzamna, the Egyptian Thoth, the Vedic Rishis. Not gods, instructors, bearers of calendars, numbers, stars. They came, they gave, they stepped back, and those who remained began to forget, until forgetting became the foundation of memory. We see the traces, but not the forms. We name the shapes, but not the hands. We admire the ruins, but not the departure. And somewhere in the void between dunes, a message may still hum, encoded in ratio's shadow's magnetic residue. But to hear it, we would have to unlearn the silence we've called knowledge. We would have to recognize the absence as deliberate. Not a loss, but a withdrawal. The builders did not leave. They receded, and we built over their footprints like sand over glass. Not all silence is absence. Some silence is structure, a frame built not to hold but to omit. And when we look back through the layered walls of history, we find gaps too perfect to be coincidence, intervals too quiet to be forgotten by chance. In the grand tapestry of ancient chronology, there are places where the thread goes slack, where centuries vanish not with decay, but with intention, where one civilization ends and another begins without the bridge of evolution. No overlap, no inheritance, just a rupture filled by belief. In Egypt, between the fall of the Old Kingdom and the rise of the Middle Kingdom, there is what scholars call the First Intermediate Period, a time of supposed chaos, a vacuum. But even chaos leaves residue art conflict tools. Here, there is almost nothing. Centuries gone like breath on glass. In Mesoamerica, between the Olmec and the Maya, there is a similar chasm. Stone heads that do not resemble those who came after. Glyphs undeciphered. Culture without successor. It is as if one song ended and another began in a different key, without echo, without reprise. And in the Indus Valley, the Harappan civilization rises with full urban complexity grids, plumbing standardized weights, then disappears. Not slowly, but suddenly. No trace of war, no trace of migration, just stillness. And after that, a linguistic void. Why do the oldest structures speak most clearly while their successors stumble in translation? What happened in the spaces between? Some propose drought, others invasion. But these are guesses. The gaps remain. Perhaps the answer lies not in what was built, but in what was buried. In Saqqara, the Serapeum holds sarcophagi of granite 70 tons each, carved to precision, polished like mirrors placed in chambers deep beneath the earth. But no mummies were ever found inside, no inscriptions, no offerings. Just emptiness, vaults without explanation. And the official story that they housed sacred bulls does not account for the engineering, the weight, the smoothness, the mathematical harmony. They seem not designed for death but for containment, or erasure. Across the world, ancient gold artifacts have been discovered, then lost again, locked away in museum basements or private collections. The Quimbaya artifacts of Colombia, some shaped like modern delta-wing aircraft. The Saqqara bird found in Egypt aerodynamic beyond its supposed purpose. Labeled toys, curiosities, and then forgotten. Knowledge does not fade so easily. It is pushed. There are tablets too burned or shattered in layers of ruin. In Nineveh, in Mohenjo-Daro, in Troy, layers not of erosion but of violence, fires set with precision, libraries destroyed not in rage but in strategy. What was written? What memory was too dangerous to preserve? In China, the bamboo annals once chronicled pre-dynastic times reigns of rulers that spanned centuries, descriptions of events impossible under modern physics. When rediscovered, the texts had been edited, shortened, normalized. The original versions lost again. History, when retold, becomes consensus, and consensus is not fact, it is agreement. And what happens when the agreement is enforced? In 1582, the Gregorian calendar replaced the Julian. 10 days were removed. October 4th was followed by October 15th. A correction, we were told. A necessary alignment. But time itself does not jump. We forced it to. How many corrections have we made? How many layers rewritten? In Europe, the Dark Ages sit as a long silence between Rome and Renaissance. Some say they never happened at all. That dates were shifted, manuscripts forged, kings invented. The phantom time hypothesis suggests entire centuries were inserted into the record. Absurd, perhaps. But the evidence is tantalizing architectural anachronisms, astronomical misalignments, redundant events recorded under different names. Even if the theory is wrong, the question remains, why does time bend so easily? Because we measure history in stone, in ink, in memory. And all three can be shaped. There are palimpsests, manuscripts scraped and reused, where original texts bleed through beneath newer ones. The Bible, the Quran, the Mahabharata. Stories layered on older stories. Morality over mythology. Law over legend. But the legends remain. Whispers of golden ages, of watchers and teachers, of knowledge given then taken, of doors closed gently not slammed. Perhaps the gaps in the timeline are not flaws. They are decisions. To remove certain ideas. To pause the transmission, to let a generation forget. So that memory becomes myth, so that truth becomes parable, so that the next question is never asked. Because the moment we ask why something is missing, we risk hearing what was removed. And silence is easier to maintain than mystery. Geometry is not invention. It is recognition. The lines already exist. The ratios already breathe beneath form. What we call discovery is merely alignment, an accidental harmony between mind and structure. And sometimes something aligns too precisely to be coincidence. Across the ancient world, stone was not just used, it was tuned. In Malta, beneath layers of limestone and dust, sits the hypogeum of Hal Saflieni, a subterranean temple carved into silence. Its chambers curve like thought, its walls hum when touched. In the so-called oracle room, a niche was found that amplifies sound in strange ways. Low frequencies resonate. Human voices shift. Visitors describe dizziness, altered consciousness, a sensation of pressure behind the eyes. Not metaphor. Measurable phenomena. Why would a Neolithic site older than the pyramids be acoustically engineered? There are no musical instruments, no inscriptions, no explanation, just resonance. Similar properties appear at Chavin de Huantar in Peru, a temple complex built with canals that produce sound when water rushes through. Whistling tunnels. Echo chambers. Not decoration. Design. At Newgrange in Ireland, a passage grave lights perfectly during the winter solstice. But not just with light. Tones also shift. Researchers found that drums played in certain areas create standing waves, vibrations that do not move but saturate. The structures are not merely aligned to the stars, they are aligned to sound. As if the builders understood that reality itself is frequency. And if that's true, what were they tuning for? What were they trying to reach or hold back? Mathematics does not care about time. The golden ratio appears in sunflower spirals and galactic arms. Pi runs endlessly through stone and sky. But ancient builders did more than use these constants, they embedded them. The Great Pyramid of Giza again encodes pi in its proportions, but it also reflects the Earth's dimensions scale ratios of latitude, equator, pole. Coincidence, some say. But the more one maps it, the less accidental it becomes. In Angkor, what the distances between temples mirror the precise orbits of Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, in sequence, in ratio, in silence. These are not decorations, they are messages, but not to us, to something that speaks through pattern. Some propose cymatics, the visual representation of sound. When sand is vibrated on a plate at certain frequencies, it forms geometric shapes, circles, hexagons, stars. Each frequency has its form. Shift the pitch, and the pattern changes. And so the question were ancient sites designed to receive or generate specific frequencies. Were temples not places of worship but instruments? In Bolivia, the Gate of the Sun at Tiwanaku bears engravings often described as astronomical depictions of the sun, the calendar, the solstice. But some researchers noted that the layout also mirrors waveform patterns, as if it weren't a picture, but a signal. Göbekli Tepe's T-shaped pillars echo tuning forks. At specific angles they resonate. Sound rebounds but doesn't dissipate. Even the Nazca lines, often viewed only as visual from above, may reflect paths of sound. The geoglyphs, when walked, create echo chambers along the hills, as if footsteps themselves once made the air respond. None of this is definitive. None of this is accepted. But the pattern is persistent. Structures that last thousands of years are not accidents. They are statements. And if they do not tell stories, they may be telling something deeper, not narrative, but vibration. The Vedic texts speak of the Om, the primordial sound, the frequency of creation. It is not a chant. It is a blueprint. The Egyptians spoke of Thoth not as a god, but as a tone, a harmonic force, a word-made structure. In the Bible, the walls of Jericho fall not to weapon, but to sound. Even myth remembers what science forgets. Modern physics agrees matter is vibration. Every particle is a loop, a wave, a resonance. But ancient builders knew this long before atoms split or electrons spun. And they built for it. Tuned spaces, harmonized stone. Not for the ear, but for something deeper. Some say the Earth itself sings Schumann resonances, electromagnetic pulses that encircle the globe. These frequencies align curiously with alpha brainwaves, the state between waking and dreaming. The temples match them. Were these places built to bridge not places, but states of being? Were they portals? Not of travel, but of perception. If so, then perhaps they were not meant to be understood, only experienced. But we've silenced them, filled their chambers with tourists, their tunnels with lights, their stone with explanation, and the frequencies have stopped speaking. Or maybe we stopped listening, because sound leaves no artifact, only effect, and geometry leaves no argument, only form. The ancients did not carve gods into stone. They carved sound into space. And what remains is not a message. It's a question, still vibrating. Some shapes return like ghosts, not because we summoned them, but because they were never truly gone. Among the ruins and the myths in carvings too precise to be mistakes, a forgotten sphere appears again and again. One more world. One more name. One more absence too complete to be accidental. In Sumerian texts, there is mention of planets beyond the known, not metaphor, not allegory. Actual names, one in particular, Nibiru, the 12th celestial body if one includes the sun and moon. It appears not in every tablet, but where it does it moves, it crosses, it disturbs. It is described not as a constant light, but a returning one, unpredictable, long vanished, always awaited. We call it a myth, an ancient misunderstanding of celestial mechanics. But the Babylonian star charts are not guesses. Their accuracy with Jupiter and Mars rivals modern ephemerides. They watched the sky like a language. And somewhere in that language was a planet we no longer see. In 1976, author Zecharia Sitchin proposed a theory controversial, ridiculed yet persistent. That Nibiru is real. A massive object on an elliptical orbit that returns every 3,600 years. That it once passed close enough to Earth to shape tides, trigger floods, influence genes. He tied it to the Anunnaki beings from the heavens, bringers of law, and craft gods who walked like men. The Sumerians did not worship them. They described them. Others had similar tales. The Dogon people of Mali spoke of Sirius B, the invisible star, long before it was observed by Western telescopes. They said their ancestors came from it. They named its orbit, its density, its twin. The Hopi, the Zuni, the Maya all preserved star knowledge deeper than their technology would allow. Not approximations, details, periods, alignments, a cosmic familiarity that should not exist. If Nibiru is only myth, why does its shape haunt petroglyphs across cultures? A winged disk, a sphere with tails, a radiant orb pursued by serpents. It is not the sun, it is not the moon, it is always other. In Egypt, Aten was once worshipped not as a god, but as a disk with hands rays in tension. Its time was brief, its temples destroyed, its memory erased. But before it vanished, it became official doctrine, not a religion, an imposition, as if something seen in the sky required obedience. What was it? Or what returned? Even in recent decades, the idea of a hidden planet has surfaced in scientific circles. Planet 9 proposed by astronomers to explain anomalies in the orbits of distant objects. Something large, distant, undetected, its mass inferred by math-not lens, its path stretched so wide it hides in plain distance. They are not calling it Nibiru, but the orbit fits. The shape fits. The effect fits. In the myths, the arrival of the lost planet is not gentle. It brings upheaval, the flood of Atrahasis, the tilting of the axis, the confusion of tongues at Babel, events that echo across traditions separated by oceans, united by water. We're told these are symbolic, cultural metaphors for local disasters. But the alignment of myth, its echo across continents, suggests something more coordinated. As if memory was shared, then fractured. And in the center of the fracture, a missing world. If it once came close, it may have left marks, not just in the sky, but in the earth. The sudden rise of mountains, the disappearance of species, the shifting of poles, these are not certainties, they are suggestions. But suggestions left unexamined become voids, and voids attract stories. There are cylinder seals that depict our solar system, the sun, in the center surrounded by planets. Not just 5, not just 7, all of them, including one more. How? Why? We dismiss them as artistic flourishes, as mistakes, as guesses that happened to be correct. But guesses do not replicate across centuries, cultures, and hemispheres. There is something else, perhaps a memory, perhaps a warning, perhaps a scar. Because if such a planet once approached, if it passed close enough to stir seas and minds, its return would not go unnoticed. It would become religion. It would become fear. It would become prophecy. And then it would become forbidden. A narrative too large to control must be denied. And so we buried it. Not beneath earth, but beneath ridicule. We laughed it away. We categorized it as pseudoscience conspiracy myth. But the symbols persist. The winged disk hovers over Persian reliefs. It circles Sumerian kings. It rides above Egyptian temples. It appears on Mayan stelae. It is not always the same, but it is always there. And what is repetition if not insistence? What are recurring symbols if not suppressed memory? Maybe the planet never existed. Maybe it was never physical. Maybe Nibiru was not a body but a force, a cycle, a reset, a rhythm hidden behind the visible ones. The ancients didn't fear it because it destroyed. They feared it because it revealed. And what it revealed, we are still not ready to see. There are patterns in the sky that no longer match, stars that have moved, alignments that once defined temples, calendars, destinies now slightly off, like instruments out of tune. We assume the stars are fixed, but they drift, slowly, invisibly, like truth behind ritual. Ancient structures across the world are aligned not just to the sun and moon, but to constellations, specific stars, specific positions. But many of those positions no longer match the sky they were built to frame. In Giza, the pyramids once mirrored Orion's belt, a near-perfect match. But today the angle is misaligned. Slightly but noticeably, the sky shifted, or the earth did, or something else. Precession, we say. A wobble in Earth's rotation. A 26,000-year cycle that makes the heavens tilt in slow motion. It explains the change, yes, but it also implies something older than history is being tracked. Who first noticed the stars were moving? Who first recorded that shift? And why did they care? The temples of Angkor Wat point to Draco. Not where it is now, but where it was, 12,000 years ago. At that time, Thuban, a star in Draco, was the North Star, the axis around which the sky spun. Why build for a sky that will never return? Unless the builders remembered it. Unless the structures are not just worship, but testimony. In Bolivia, Tiwanaku's Kalasasaya temple also tracks solstices, but its side altars align with stars that only rose in certain positions many thousands of years before the temple's accepted age. At Nabta Playa in Egypt, a circle of stones stands in the desert. It aligns with Orion and Sirius, but not as they appear today. As they did around 6000 BC, at least. We have no texts to explain this. No records of skywatchers that early. Only the stones and their silence. And sometimes that silence breaks. The ancient Greek myth of Phaethon tells of a celestial body falling from the sky, dragging fire across the heavens. The Book of Enoch speaks of stars cast down. The Popol Vuh of the Maya warns of a time when the sky lost balance, when the faces of the sky and the earth changed. Not stories. Maybe memory? Astronomers now acknowledge stellar proper motion, that stars, even entire constellations, shift over millennia. But the ancient world should not have known that. Not without instruments, not without math. Yet somehow they did. Some say they tracked it through myth, that gods were metaphors for stars and their dramas were celestial movements. But why create myths so elaborate, so synchronized across cultures? Unless the stories weren't metaphors, unless they were codes. The Dogon of Mali say Sirius B was once closer, that it flared and faded. They describe its orbit as elliptical, its density as great. Knowledge modern astronomy only confirmed in the last century. How? They say it was told to them. By those who came from the star itself. We do not believe them, but we cannot explain them. There's a phrase, as above, so below. An axiom echoed in Hermetic texts, alchemy, and mystery schools. But what if it's not philosophy? What if it's instruction? What if what happens in the sky happens here? What if the dislocation of stars echoes a dislocation of memory? Because as the constellations shifted, so did civilizations. Floods came, cities fell, languages collapsed. And then new stories began, always with new gods, always with new stars. In China, the earliest star charts already mapped over 1,000 celestial bodies, their positions, their paths, no prelude, no primitive versions, just completeness. In Mesoamerica, the Dresden Codex records Venus cycles with stunning precision down to a fraction of a day. In India, the ancient Vedanga Jyotisha lists lunar mansions, planetary motions, eclipse predictions, not guesses, calculations. We assume this knowledge was gained slowly, trial and error over centuries. But what if it was preserved? What if it came from before the stars moved? And if so, where did it come from? Across mythology there are repeated figures, sky kings, stargazers, watchers. They do not rule land. They map the heavens. They teach calendars, time seasons. They bring order. And then they vanish, like the stars they followed. In modern times, satellites have tracked micro-movements of stars that suggest gravitational influence, tugs from unseen objects. Dark matter, rogue planets, or something else? The sky is no longer static. And neither is our story. What we assumed eternal Polaris, Orion the Dippers, is drifting. The maps must be redrawn. But the ancient maps may still be accurate, just for a different time. A forgotten era, a different sky. The stars we now see are not the stars they saw, but their structures still point toward them. Still wait, as if one day the stars will return, and with them the memory. There is a room that no longer exists. It once held more knowledge than any place on earth. A temple of scrolls of charts of tongues now buried. The Library of Alexandria. But what burned was more than paper. What vanished was more than thought. What disappeared was the memory of what we once allowed ourselves to ask. Built in the 3rd century BCE, the library was not just a building. It was a collection of all collected things. Scripts from India, Egypt, Greece, Babylon. Theories, records, observations. A memory palace for the planet. Over 400,000 scrolls at its peak, some say more. Its halls echoed with voices that had seen stars unrecorded and drawn maps of lands we have never redrawn. And then it was gone. Historians argue over how. Fire, war, neglect. Some say Caesar's siege began the end. Others blame religious zealotry centuries later. But none can say what exactly was lost, because we never knew how much was there. The loss was not just erasure, it was a severing. Some texts survived just fragments. Claudius Ptolemy's geocentric models, heroes' steam devices, lists of strange machines, mentions of books never found. But most of it, the core, the questions, the voices, disappeared into ash. Why is it that the earliest accounts of this loss are vague? Why no inventories? Why no salvaged catalog? It is as if the silence was part of the plan. They say Hypatia, the last librarian, was murdered by a mob. Her skin flayed with pottery shards, her bones scattered. Not because of what she believed, but because of what she preserved. She became a symbol, not of wisdom, but of its cost. In that moment, knowledge became dangerous. What was so threatening? Among the scrolls were texts said to describe flying machines. Others detailed optics beyond their era, refractions devices to magnify. There were scripts on medicine surgeries we only recently rediscovered. Charts of the stars that predated their naming. Mentions of continents never mapped. But more than content, it was the tone. The texts asked questions no longer allowed. What is the soul? Where does thought come from? Can the mind shape matter? Do stars repeat? Is time a loop? Is the earth remembered elsewhere? These were not just hypotheses. They were positions. And when the light of that inquiry went out, something recoiled in its place. We replaced memory with scripture. We replaced questions with dogma. We replaced the library with silence. But memory, like fire, leaves embers. In later centuries, whispers emerged of a shadow library, copies smuggled out before the flames, caravans that fled into the deserts, monks who memorized entire shelves, vaults beneath temples in India, in Tibet, in Ethiopia. Myths, or maybe the migrations of thought. There are medieval books that reference older works no longer found, mentions of devices lost, of philosophies never born. In Islamic texts, scholars spoke of the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, modeled after Alexandria, preserving Greek and Egyptian scrolls. But it too was sacked, burned. Its rivers ran black with ink, its libraries gone in hours. What are we so afraid of remembering? The Maya recorded cycles of time stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. But when the Spaniards arrived, they burned the codices. Only 3 survive. The rest gone. Not because they were wrong, but because they were older than permission allowed. In China, the Qin dynasty buried scholars alive and torched texts that did not align with state-approved history. Not errors, contradictions. What if every culture has done the same? Erased the parts that did not match the new narrative? What if Alexandria is not one library but many, each burned, each buried, each edited? And the deeper question, what if it wasn't knowledge that was destroyed, but memory? Because knowledge can be rewritten. But memory is dangerous. It brings shape to what authority cannot contain. And so it must be buried, not just with fire, but with disbelief. Today we have more information than ever, but information is not memory. It is noise, a flood with no shape. The library, they say, had order. Cross-referenced scrolls, topics linked by logic, not power. Knowledge seen as a living tree, not a pyramid. We do not build like that anymore. Our systems are databases, not gardens, and so we wander surrounded by answers, unable to find the right questions. Perhaps that is what Alexandria held. Not truth, but questions we were not yet ready to carry forward. And maybe still aren't. Somewhere at the edge of sleep, where thought becomes symbol and symbol becomes presence, a sensation stirs the feeling that something is watching. Not malevolent, not hidden, but near. Close enough to touch, if only from the other side of the veil. Across cultures, across centuries, across forgotten dialects, there are stories of visitors, not from the sky, not from stars, but from beside, from the thin place, from the mirror not of reflection, but inversion. They are never described the same. Some are luminous, some are tall, robed in silence, some are shadowed, all angles and hum. Yet the reaction is always the same awe, not fear. Recognition, not resistance, as if these beings were not foreign but remembered. The Celts called them the Sida, not fairies in the modern sense, but older, dignified, architects of mist and thought. They lived in hills beneath the earth, but also beyond. They appeared at thresholds, doorways, dawns, deaths. In Aboriginal lore, the Wandjina stare from cave walls with wide eyes and no mouths, watchers-givers of rain and law. They arrived without sound, then retreated into rock. In Sumer, the Apkallu rose from the sea, half man, half fish, bearing knowledge-language tools, not gods, not men, something in between. Always the same, they arrive, they instruct, they disappear. Not conquered, not killed, withdrawn. There are temples in India with depictions of beings seated in machines shaped like lotuses, surrounded by halos descending with gesture not of power, but of offering. The Vedas speak of vimanas, aerial crafts not built by humans. They are described in detail propulsion systems, metals, patterns of movement. Why would a myth contain engineering? Why would a hymn contain flight? Some say these are poetic metaphors. Others claim reverse projection, modern ideas pasted over old stories. But the symbols remain stubborn, too persistent, too familiar, as if they reference something the body remembers even if the mind forgets. There are caves in Ecuador where artifacts have been found, metal plates etched with unknown writing depictions of stars, as seen from deep space maps of continents connected by corridors. The cave system, known as Cueva de los Tallos, was explored by military units, scientists, even astronauts. But no official report has ever confirmed or denied what was found. The records are fragmentary, the conclusions absent. Some say that is the point, because the closer we look at these intersections, these meetings between here and not here, the more unstable the story becomes. Who were these visitors? Where did they go? Or did they ever leave? There is a recurring detail contact through sound. The beings speak not with voice, but with resonance. Minds are filled, not instructed. Symbols emerge fully formed. Telepathy is too simple a word. It is transmission. And after the transmission, something changes. The receiver never returns unchanged. Prophets, shamans, visionaries, those touched by light, those who vanished for days then returned with geometry in their eyes. They describe knowledge too large to hold, concepts that cannot be translated, visions that unravel language. And always the feeling of being seen. Not watched, seen. In the desert near Sedona, there are petroglyphs of spirals intersecting with figures not shaped like any known animal. They stand next to ladders, doorways in stone. The Hopi speak of Kachina's spirit beings who dance in ceremony wearing masks to reflect their otherness. But the elders say the masks are not costumes. They are reminders, shapes seen long ago. In Tibet, monks meditate to connect with beings called Deva's luminous forms that guide through dream and mantra. The instructions are not in words, but frequencies, tones that alter breath, then blood, then boundary. Modern experiencers describe similar states. The pattern is not random. There are commonalities: light, paralysis, tone, overwhelming calm. And afterward, knowing. Not knowledge, but knowing. Something settled like dust in the lungs. Could these visitors be real? Or are they what the mind sees when history opens? Perhaps they are neither physical nor imaginary. Perhaps they are memory. A higher order of it. A presence that cannot be recorded, only remembered. And perhaps they do not visit us. Perhaps we in moments of silence visit them. In dreams. In trance. In grief. At the edges of consciousness when the noise quiets. When the veil lifts not upward but inward. There are fingerprints in ancient art spirals, in stone eyes, too large limbs too long. We say they are stylization, symbolism. But we do not ask, what are they symbols of? We do not ask, what did they once describe? Because once we do, the story breaks. The neat arc of progress is interrupted by a glance backward that sees too much. And the beings, whatever they were, are no longer myth. They are questions. Still watching. Still waiting. From just behind the glass, stories are not born. They are remembered. They drift through time like seeds on wind settling into minds, ready to grow them again. But sometimes what returns is not the story that left. It is changed, bent, trimmed to fit the shape of permission, and in the transformation something ancient is lost. In nearly every culture there are tales older than writing, not myths of creation but myths of interruption, floods, fires, sky-darkening events, gods punished, languages scattered, worlds reset. The archetypes overlap: a fall, a betrayal, a warning ignored, and then a silence filled by rule. But what if these were not metaphors? What if they were accounts? Not of moral failure, but of memory fractured. The Epic of Gilgamesh speaks of a great flood. So does the Old Testament. So do the Vedas. So do the traditions of the Aboriginals, the Incas, the Chinese, the Yoruba. The names are different. The waters are the same. The Hopi tell of previous worlds destroyed by imbalance each time a few are saved, guided underground or across waters by spirit beings, not chosen for virtue, chosen to remember. But as these stories passed through time, their structure hardened. What was once layered became linear. What was once suggestive became prescriptive. Stories became scriptures. And with scripture came authority. With authority came silence. The Sumerian goddess, Inanna, descended into the underworld, a journey filled with metaphor, yes, but also with echoes of astronomy, consciousness, and loss. When retold, she became Ishtar, then Astarte, then demonized. The Egyptian Isis, once a goddess of restoration and cosmic balance, was diluted into archetypes of motherhood, then overwritten by newer symbols. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent of Mesoamerica, a bringer of knowledge and cycles, was twisted into a colonial villain. From wisdom to heresy in a single translation. Across the steppe the Tengri faith revered the sky as mind endless, unbound. But when codified, it fractured. What once connected became something to fear. The deeper you look, the more you see every myth has an earlier shadow. Every legend walks with a forgotten twin, and often that twin tells a different story. A story where gods are not creators but caretakers. Where time is not linear but cyclical. Where humanity is not broken but veiled. The Rigveda speaks of sound as origin, not a bang, but a tone. Om, the unstruck sound, the frequency of becoming. Not theology, physics in symbol, but now it is ritual, repetition without context. In the Gnostic texts, Jesus does not command, he reveals. He speaks not of salvation, but of remembering, that the kingdom is not above, but within, that the divine is not given, but reawakened. These texts were buried, hidden in jars, not burned perhaps because destruction was too obvious. Better to forget them gently. In the Nag Hammadi library, the Gospel of Thomas opens with a line not repeated in any church. Whoever finds the meaning of these words will not taste death. Not belief. Understanding. A threat not to empire but to narrative. Because once a story becomes official, it stops moving. And the older versions, the ones with more ambiguity, more multiplicity, they become dangerous. So they are simplified. The serpent becomes evil. The tree becomes temptation. The feminine becomes chaos. Order is declared, and memory folds. But in the margins, the old stories persist. In lullabies, in symbols, in dreams. The spiral carved into stone. The triple goddess. The horned god. The sun's death and rebirth across solstice. The procession of stars. The breath of forests. The intelligence of water. Fragments. Flickers. Not erased but rearranged. Not silenced but misread. And beneath them a truth too vast for certainty. That story is not a cage, but a mirror. And what we reflect, we become. Maybe that's why they feared the older myths. Because they offered no authority, only participation. Because they invited not obedience, but awakening. And awakening cannot be legislated. It cannot be taxed. It cannot be told. It must be remembered. Walls are meant to keep things out or in, but not all walls are built for defense. Some are built for memory. Some are built to shape thought. Some are not built by hands at all. Stretching across thousands of miles through mountains, across plains into forests and mist, are walls with no war behind them, no conqueror, no invasion, no clear enemy, just stone heavy, precise, enduring. The most famous stands in China, the Great Wall. But its oldest segments predate the dynasties often credited. Some stones are laid in patterns unknown to those periods. Some parts do not align with military logic. They do not protect cities. They lead nowhere. They rise, they fall, they vanish. No battles are recorded at those walls. Then there are the walls of Sacsayhuaman. In Peru, cyclopean structures of stones so massive, so interlocked, that even modern engineers blink. Not cut with iron, not set with mortar, but fitted like thought. No two stones the same, each unique, each shaped to its neighbors with impossible precision. Official stories say the Incas built them, but the Incas themselves said they did not. They inherited, they maintained, they honored, but they did not create. The older the wall, the deeper the silence. In Ireland, there are dry stone walls that stretch across countryside with no clear purpose, not boundary, not fortification. They follow ley lines. Some say they hum. In Jordan, the Khat Shabib runs 93 miles through open terrain. It's too low to be a defensive structure. It offers no cover, no refuge. No record explains its origin. Yet it endures. What were these walls holding? Or dividing? In India's Maharashtra state, the ancient fort of Daulatabad holds a fortress carved into rock, ringed with walls, traps, spirals, dead ends. It was designed less to keep out armies, and more to disorient, to confuse, to reset perception. The outer world had to be forgotten to enter. In Africa, the great Zimbabwe ruins rise from the earth with walls 10 meters high, built without mortar, their stones stacked with logic not taught in modern schools. The enclosure circles nothing. The entrance is symbolic. There is no fortress inside, just space. And between those spaces, silence. Some walls protect, others obscure. Some define territory, others reality. Perhaps these walls once divided more than land. Perhaps they were not built to defend people, but to mark presence, to designate areas where something had happened or still was, like warnings in stone. Because many of these walls align with other things, celestial events, underground water magnetic anomalies. They pulse not visibly, but in data. Measurements shift near them. Instruments misbehave. And sometimes people do too. Visitors speak of dizziness, of strange dreams, of sounds beneath hearing, as if the walls remember something no longer spoken. In ancient myth, there were walls built by giants, by gods, by beings not seen, only felt. In Norse legend, a divine builder creates a wall around Asgard, the realm of the gods. When asked how he built so fast, it is revealed his horse is not a horse, it is a force. A reminder that construction is not just muscle, but meaning. In the Bible, the walls of Jericho fall to sound, not weapon, not siege, but vibration. As if their purpose was not to keep out men, but to hold in frequency. Across cultures, walls are often alive, or believed to be. They weep, they whisper, they crack at moments of change. In dreams, walls symbolize barriers of thought, memories we dare not revisit. And still we build them. Not to divide land, but to organize forgetting. Modern society surrounds itself with invisible walls, borders, screens, timelines. We walk within algorithms, think within categories, scroll within parameters. But the ancient walls were different. They had weight. They invited awe. They asked not to be understood, but witnessed. And many face stars. Not cities, not ports. Stars. As if alignment was more important than access. Who did they align for? What gaze were they built to catch? Some say the walls were calendars, that shadows moved across them in sacred sequence, that light returned each year to a crack or a mark. Others say they held energy, stored vibration, focused consciousness. Perhaps they did all of that. Or none. Perhaps they were simply the last attempt to hold something in place. An echo, a memory, a shape in stone that could not be carried by voice alone. And perhaps that's why we still feel them. Because not all walls confine. Some remember. There are symbols carved in stone that no language can read, not because they are too complex, but because they do not want to be read. They do not explain. They do not translate. They remain still waiting for a mind shaped differently, a logic we no longer use. Across the earth, megaliths stand etched with markings, spirals, lines, grooves, grids, circles within circles. Not letters, not words, not messages in the way we define message. And yet they pull at something beneath understanding. At Newgrange in Ireland, on the entrance stone, triple spirals are carved with perfect curves, a pattern repeated deep within the mound. No inscription accompanies them, no story explains them. But once each year the light of the solstice sun slides down the passage and strikes that stone exactly. It touches the symbol with fire. Why that shape? Why that light? At Gavrenis in France, inside a chambered cairn older than the pyramids, are stones covered in swirling, overlapping engravings, lines like waves, shapes like vibrations. They do not depict, they radiate. No one knows what they mean. Theories multiply, answers vanish. In Valcamonica, Italy, thousands of petroglyphs stretch across rock faces. Some human, some geometric, some simply not categorizable. A solar wheel, a figure with outstretched arms, an unknown script that repeats not like a sentence, but like a chant. The same appears in Bolivia, in Armenia, in Saudi Arabia, on Easter Island. Symbols that are neither art nor alphabet. Some call them proto-writing. Others say they're religious, ornamental, ritualistic. But such words only push aside the real discomfort. These symbols do not belong to our way of thinking. They are not meant to be read linearly. They do not tell. They suggest. They ask the reader to remember, not decode. What if they were not writing down words, but recording states? Moods, frequencies, thoughts before language. What if the markings were not communication, but preservation? A kind of cognitive fossil. Modern researchers have noted that many of these carvings appear near natural acoustics, echo chambers, stone circles that sing when wind passes, places where sound changes, where the earth itself seems to speak. Some symbols resemble cymatic patterns, geometric shapes created when sound vibrates across a surface, sand-forming mandalas, water shaping sacred geometry, the invisible made visible. Perhaps the carvings are not art. They are echoes, memories of sounds once used to shape reality. In the Andes, the site of Tiahuanaco holds the Gate of the Sun, a monolith carved with figures too precise to be primitive, too stylized to be ornamental. Some resemble antennae. Some seem robotic. All are silent. A nearby artifact known as the Fuente Magna Bowl bears two scripts, one similar to Sumerian cuneiform, the other unknown. The bowl's existence challenges timelines. It is either a hoax or history misplaced. But it is not alone. In the jungles of India, stones have been found with inscriptions in scripts not matching any known local language. In caves in the American Southwest, pictographs echo those of Central Asia. It is not that one culture influenced another. It is that something deeper may have influenced them all. A substratum of symbol, a logic of image, not sentence, a way of seeing and remembering the world in pattern. Some believe it was a universal language, but not spoken, felt, stored in the bones, recognized not by reading but by resonance. And perhaps we lost the key not because it was taken, but because we stopped listening. In modern times, crop circles appear with similar geometry, intricate, expansive. dismissed as hoaxes, yet occasionally displaying mathematical complexity beyond casual creation. When mapped, some show fractals, others mimic magnetic fields. What if ancient carvings were the same? Not art, not code, but echoes of interaction. Marks left by contact with forces outside explanation. There are recurring symbols, the spiral, the double helix, the triskelion, the keyhole, the radiant eye. They appear in the Neolithic, in the Paleolithic, in dreams. They do not change. Only where they are found changes. That is not evolution. That is persistence. And what persists without cause demands attention. Not answers, attention. Maybe the symbols were not meant to be solved. Maybe they were meant to remind of a logic before time, of a knowing before language. And when we carve them even now, even unconsciously, in art, in architecture, in movement, we participate in something ancient. Not hidden, just forgotten, waiting in stone, still warm with memory. Water has no memory, they say, but rivers remember, not in language but in motion, in the way they carve land, in the way they disappear. Somewhere beneath the deserts of Arabia there was once a river. It flowed across what is now sand and silence. It fed life. It nourished green. Satellite imagery shows its ghost dry channels, buried curves, the shadow of flow long vanished. They call it the Kuwait River, though it has no water now. It once met the Euphrates, they think. It may have been the reason people settled. It may have been why civilizations began. But the records are quiet. Why was it forgotten? In China's Taklamakan Desert, beneath the dunes, lies the buried city of Lulan. It was once a vibrant hub-trade culture complexity, but the river moved. The land dried. The people left. Not all at once, not violently, but inevitably. The same happened in Central Asia. The Aral Sea shrank not just from modern misuse, but from older shifts. Towns became skeletons. Canals turned to dust. What was once a blue heart faded into salt. Civilization follows water. And when water leaves, memory dissolves. In the Indus Valley, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa bloomed near rivers that no longer run. The Ghaggar Hakra, once mighty, is now seasonal, a trickle, a rumor. But satellite images tell another story of a river wider than the Ganges, older than history. Texts speak of the Saraswati, a sacred river, a mother of knowledge. Some say it never existed. Others say it dried up 5,000 years ago. The truth may be both. What happens when a river vanishes? What happens to the people, the stories, the rhythm? They scatter, they adapt, or they forget. But the forgetting is slow. In Africa, Lake Megachad once stretched across nations. It was an inland sea. Now only its fragment remains. The sands around it hold pottery bones tools. Evidence of life now out of place. No one remembers the sea, only the wind. In the Amazon beneath jungle and root, researchers found traces of canals, engineered landscapes, paths of water, straight lines that do not match nature. And then nothing. The jungle took it back. We assume it was always wild, but maybe it was reclaimed. By design, because sometimes a river does not disappear. It is moved, diverted, intentionally. In Peru, near Nazca, aqueducts called puquios still bring water from underground. They spiral like fingerprints. Some are over 1,000 years old, still functioning. The knowledge of how to build them is lost. But they remain. Beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent at Teotihuacan, archaeologists found a tunnel. Artificial, filled with mercury, a river of metal beneath stone. No one knows why, or how, or what it symbolized. What river was being replicated? What flow was being mirrored? In Egypt, the Nile's course has shifted over millennia. Temples now distant from water once sat beside it. The alignments no longer make sense. But perhaps they did. Once. When the river obeyed different forces. Some ancient maps show tributaries we cannot locate. Others show lakes where there is only sand. Mistakes, we say? Or memories? In West Africa, Dogon traditions speak of a time when rivers sang, when their curves matched the sky, when stars could be read in the flow of current. Not poetry, not myth, just another kind of geography. A sacred geography. One not drawn by land but by movement. By intention. Because rivers do not just cut land, they carry thought. They shape belief. They define where temples are built, where crops grow, where stories begin. And when they are gone, so is the story. But sometimes that's the point. Sometimes rivers are removed not by drought, but by design. To bury, to conceal, to shift the frame. What culture once flourished along the lost Kuwait River? What archives did the Saraswati cradle? What visions were reflected in Lake Megachad? We do not know. We cannot. The water is gone. And memory, like stone, needs pressure to persist. Without water, nothing is written. Without water, there is only dust. And yet in that dust we dig. We find cities without rivers, monuments without purpose, calendars without harvest, traces of knowledge that once flowed like water through hands and minds. And all that's left are beds of absence, dry maps, echoes, ghosts of current. Perhaps the greatest flood was not a deluge. Perhaps it was a retreat. Not water rising, but water being pulled away. Not to punish, but to erase. Because when the river leaves, the path is broken, and the traveler forgets where they were going. Some monuments do not ask for names. They do not carry inscriptions nor claim authorship. They stand without context, without nation, without declared function. And that absence speaks more than any dedication. On windswept plateaus in forest clearings atop forgotten hills, there are stones set upright, not randomly, not clumsily, but with a logic that feels deliberate. The stones face no one. They speak no language. They simply are. In Namibia, near the Brandberg Mountain, a solitary pillar stands amid sand and rock. It bears no carvings, no entrance, its purpose unknown. Locals avoid it. It hums in the heat. In southern Turkey, Göbekli Tepe rises from earth like a question. Circular enclosures, T-shaped pillars, strange creatures carved in bas-relief. No tools found, no homes, no graves, no signs of agriculture. It is not a city. It is not a tomb. It is not anything we understand. And yet it predates the wheel. It predates writing. It predates domestication. Then it was buried carefully, deliberately. A monument erased not by time, but by hand. Who covers their memory so gently? And why? In Armenia, the standing stones of Karahunj, some with circular holes drilled through them, point toward the stars. They predate Stonehenge. They may have been an observatory, or an instrument, or something else. But no texts explain them. No myths remain. Only arrangement. Only presence. Across the Pacific on Easter Island, the Moai gaze inland, not out to sea, not to enemies, not to gods. They watch the land itself. Their backs are to the horizon. Their faces are solemn, their bodies mostly buried. But beneath each one a platform. Under the platform, often tunnels. Where do they lead? No one knows. Or no one says. On the Bolivian Altiplano, Pumapunku's blocks lie scattered as if shattered from above. Their angles are perfect. Their cuts are sharp. Some corners are carved with right angles within right angles, precision unknown even to modern stonework. But the site is broken. The pieces misaligned, like a puzzle dismantled. Not by weather, by intent. What monument would be disassembled so precisely? And why leave the pieces? In Japan, the megaliths of Asuka hide in plain sight. One shaped like a turtle, another like a spaceship. The Masuda no Iwafun, a massive carved rock with two protrusions, sits atop a hill, its meaning lost. No writing, no tools, just presence. They are not tombs. They are not dwellings. They are not explained. They are remembered only by shape. And shape, perhaps, is the message. Because the oldest monuments do not carry names. They do not declare allegiance. They align to stars. They align to solstices. They resonate. Not all structures are meant to be understood. Some are meant to be experienced. Like music played once, still echoing. In New Mexico, the Chaco Canyon buildings align to lunar cycles that span 18.6 years. Not yearly, not seasonal. A cycle requiring generations to track. Who builds for a moon they'll never see return. In Malta, underground temples carved from limestone twist in spiral patterns. They match no blueprint. They obey no geometry we teach. But when sound is made within, it resonates in precise ways. Frequencies bounce. Breath thickens. They are instruments of space, not to amplify but to shape perception. And the names given to them now are modern. The ancient names are gone. Some never existed. Because not all sacredness speaks aloud. Some is built only to be known in silence. The monument without a name does not seek recognition. It does not wish to be admired. It holds a function no longer active. Or maybe, still active but misunderstood. What if these structures are not ruins? What if they are sleeping? Waiting for alignment, for return, for resonance. Or perhaps they are markers, placed to remember what must not be spoken. A warning, a promise, a scar, because absence itself can be architecture, and silence when shaped can endure longer than words. So we pass these monuments, we measure them, photograph them, label them, and still they do not answer. Because answers are not what they hold. They hold a question. Still humming, still standing, still untouched, not by time, but by forgetting. At the origin of belief there was no division. The sacred was not confined to temples. The divine did not wear crowns. It flowed like wind, like breath through all things. And then slowly belief was sculpted, shaped into systems, sharpened into laws. And something vast became narrow. Before scriptures, before prophets, before doctrine, there were whispers. Across continents, the earliest spiritual texts spoke not of hierarchy, but of relationship. Not of obedience, but of connection. The earth was not a stage. It was a presence. The stars were not distant. They were family. In the Rig Veda, fire was not an element, it was a being. Wind was not weather, it was messenger. Water had voice. Dawn had memory. Everything lived. But as time moved, the language changed. Animism gave way to formal pantheons. Polytheism tightened into monotheism, and belief once wild became structured. With structure came exclusion, and with exclusion came erasure. The earliest versions of the Torah mention other gods, not denials, acknowledgments, warnings, boundaries. You shall have no other gods before me, not because they didn't exist, but because they did. The ancient Hebrews were not monotheistic in origin. They evolved toward it, through conflict, through editing. In Canaanite traditions, El was the high god. He had 70 sons, one of them Yahweh. Over time, Yahweh rose. El faded. The names blurred. The hierarchy collapsed into singularity. And with that collapse, the feminine was removed. Asherah, once the queen of heaven consort of El, was written out. Her statues torn down. Her groves burned. But her presence lingers in clay figurines, in buried shrines, in the word Asherot scattered across forbidden places. She was not erased completely, only hidden. In early Christian texts, Mary Magdalene is named as disciple witness teacher. In apocryphal Gospels, she speaks of visions of inner paths of silence, but she too was reframed, reduced, redefined, from voice to vessel, from companion to repentant. What is the cost of removing the feminine? Not symbolically, structurally. Because when belief is unbalanced, the reflection of the world shifts. Nature becomes resource. Power becomes command. Mystery becomes threat. In the earliest layers of Islam, there were verses now missing. Verses the prophet recited, then retracted. The satanic verses, scholars call them. Lines that briefly acknowledged Meccan goddesses, later declared false, removed. A moment of contradiction. Silenced. In Buddhism, some schools once taught that enlightenment was not exclusive to men, that the bodhisattva could wear any face, but centuries of patriarchal rule filtered what was passed down. The feminine again subdued. Across traditions, patterns repeat. The old gods are killed. The old truths trimmed. What remains is clean, controlled, codified. But underneath the suppressed survives. In Ethiopia, scrolls known as magic texts contain prayers not found in any Bible. They invoke angels' unrecognized symbols, not listed names older than Moses. They are dismissed as superstition. But their rhythm is exact. Their geometry precise. In Syria, Christian monks once painted images of a female Holy Spirit, the Ruach, the breath, feminine in Hebrew, later translated into Greek neuter, then Latin masculine. Gender transformed by language, meaning inverted by grammar. The divine recast. And once the image changes, so does the world it reflects. In Amazonian cosmology, the first being was neither man nor woman, but both. It split not to create hierarchy, but balance. Twin serpents, twin winds, twin songs. But no twin remains in modern creeds. Only singularity, only control. What was once flowing is now a wall, a pulpit, a throne. And those who remembered otherwise were silenced. Not just women, whole traditions, whole languages of belief. The Cathars of medieval France believed in duality, a balance of light and dark, male and female. They were eradicated, burned, their texts lost. The Gnostics believed that knowledge was salvation, that each soul carried a spark. Their books were buried to protect them, only to be found centuries later, whispering still. That belief was never meant to be rigid. That truth was never meant to be singular. And now the world echoes that imbalance. We speak of God as He. We see heaven as hierarchy. We build temples like palaces. And we forget that the earliest rituals needed no walls. Only wind. Only fire. Only a circle. The removal of the feminine from theology was not an accident. It was a strategy. To centralize. To conquer. To control. But the feminine never vanished. She waits. In symbols. In silence. In stone. Still breathing beneath the surface. Still dreaming of return. In the beginning there was not a word, there was a hum. A resonance too slow to be sound, too vast to be claimed. It passed through everything not outside or above, but within. And the world moved with it, in silence, in rhythm, in knowing. Now that knowing is gone. Not all at once. Not in fire or flood, but in fragments, a slow unraveling beneath language. Each piece of history, each question left unanswered, each structure buried too cleanly, they all point to the same thing, a fracture. Not of land, not of people, but of memory. There is a break in our timeline that no one admits. Not a lost year, not a single event, but a thinning, a place where the world lost weight, and thought kept going, but without roots. We built cities on that hollow. We wrote scriptures in that quiet. We mapped the stars from a sky already moved. And we never looked back, because to look back would mean to feel it. The dissonance, the absence, the gentle pressure of something once whole, no longer there. What remains now is noise. Information without context. Symbols without source. Monuments without names. Stories repeated so often they've lost their edge. But under that repetition, something still pulses. A low note. Unheard by ears but not unfelt. A murmur beneath the mind. The ancients called it many things, the word, the breath, the pulse, the turning. We forgot the names, but not the ache. The ache for something remembered only in dream or ritual, or when staring too long at stars that feel too familiar. That ache is not nostalgia. It's the echo of the original hum. Still trying to return. Still vibrating through stone. Still encoded in ruins we pretend not to understand. The pyramids. The Serapeum. The walls with no war behind them. The rivers with no source. The carvings with no language. They are not mistakes. They are what was left behind when the hum faded. Anchors in a sea of forgetting. You can feel it in places. Not loud. Not certain. Just uneasy. A temple too aligned. A cave that bends sound. A story that repeats across continents. They are pressure points. Not to be solved, but to be softened into. To stand in. To breathe with. Because maybe the truth was never meant to be spoken. Only tuned to. The ancients may not have known more than us. They may have simply remembered what we have tried to forget. That reality is not constructed. It is played. That thought is not separate. It is sound. And that silence, true silence, is not empty. It is full of answers we've stopped asking. And maybe that is why all the questions now feel hollow. Why history feels recursive. Why knowledge feels thin. We are no longer in rhythm. We are no longer in resonance. And the hum waits. It doesn't beg. It does not break. It only is, still vibrating, still forming the shapes of forgotten temples in sleep, still holding the memory of what we were before chronology claimed us, before names hardened, before time narrowed. It is not behind us. It is beneath, and beneath it, the truth, not the kind that answers, the kind that remembers, the kind that can only be felt, like a whisper at the bottom of all things, soft, unclaimed, but waiting. This is historic sleep. And if the silence stirred something within you, you can follow the frequency at deformedhistory.com or wherever you listen. Not for answers, but for echoes.